On the Neil Wilkins podcast today, I am delighted to welcome Kathy Galloway. Now, Kathy has been described as the clarity wizard, and we're going to find out what that means. Kathy has spent many, many years helping food and beverage brand owners to increase revenue and decrease risk by clarifying their brand positioning. So it isn't necessarily all about the product, it's about the wider brand. Now, Kathy has worked with the likes of PepsiCo, Snapple, Canada Dry, and more. So really knows a thing or two about this subject. So welcome to the podcast, Kathy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to get to chat with you. I've been catching up on some of your episodes. I really like what you're doing with this podcast. So I'm thrilled to be one of the guests.
Oh, that's brilliant. And it's an interesting thing because a lot of the guests that we've had on recently have obviously been, talking about hot topics like AI and marketing and, all these kind of emerging technologies. I've had quite a lot of people come through with very much a business to business marketing focus. And that's great if you're in B2B marketing. But I think most people learn so much from consumer brands. And I think when you come to food and beverage, that is the sharp end. That is the real kind of pointy end of marketing, where if you get it wrong, you get it wrong big time. But if you get it right, wow, yeah, great things happen. So kind of what's the latest? Well, what are the hot topics really at the moment in your sector?
Yeah, you're so right about consumer packaged goods and CPG in general. I'm highly passionate about the space and I love doing this. I started my career a long time ago at PepsiCo. And when I started consulting, I was getting pulled into other industries and quickly realized that this is not where I love to be. Where I love to be is the excitement, the kind of the sexiness, and the day-to-day of CPG, I think, is what I love. You're going into someone's home and you're touching them every single day, multiple times a day with CPG products. And as a consultant, and the fact that I've touched over 30 product categories at this point means I'm quite literally in front of consumers with the work that I've done or that I've helped to do every single day. And I love that. I love that because a lot of the work just starts with the consumer. And I would say that that's probably the first place to start with what is hot in CPG. And it's an evergreen hotness. And there's a reason for that. It's an evergreen hotness that it's all about the consumer because we are constantly changing. We are constantly changing. There was a time 30, 40 years ago where you could do a piece of consumer research. You can understand people are, let's say literally 20 years ago, we're looking for low fat products. Low fat was the thing to talk about. And that drove the industry for 3, 4, 5 years. But today, something like turmeric, which was incredibly hot 2 years ago, lasted and quote unquote, I'm talking about lasted in being, the only thing we talk about 3, 4, 5 months. And even now things are moving even faster than that. So the idea that a consumer lens, a consumer focus, a consumer understanding is hot for marketing and for CPG is very true, but will never stop being true. That is the thing that is hot and trending.
Becomes then tough, doesn't it? Because it's obviously just by its nature, it is a very, very competitive kind of broader industry to be part of. But if the timescales are coming ever shorter, if there is no such thing as being hot because things are just moving through so fast that if you blink, you miss them. Well, how are brands and how are business owners and how are marketers coping with that? Because that feels quite stressful.
It really is, and I would say it can be stressful, and it is stressful for businesses, for brands and brand leaders that don't get that the pulse of the consumer is continuous. If you understand that, you understand the dynamic of the way the world operates in that way, then it's not stressful because there are ways and techniques, tools, resources, experts who help you stay on track with that. And creating a culture of continuous learning, continuous questioning, continuous empathy is really the secret to that we're always asking the question, but why are they doing that? Why are they picking up this product? Why is this product selling more than these other products, whether it's mine or not? I get that it's hot. And if I turn on social media, there are 15 TikToks and 30 reels about the topic, but why? Why are we obsessed with fill in the blank thing that we're obsessed with? For the companies and the leaders that don't have that skill set, that are not constantly sharpening that saw, it is stressful, because in a matter of months, you will find new piece of information that contradicts something you recently learned, you developed an entire strategy around, and are in the beginning stages of executing. And now the consumer doesn't care, or it's not so much that they don't care, but they care about it in a different way. Because oftentimes it's just as leaders in this industry, we are confused and constantly trying to learn. I promise you the consumer is way more confused, because we're constantly throwing new terms and claims and things at them. And so if you have developed a plan and a strategy, and now the world has shifted by 3 degrees, and we're just not really talking about it that way anymore, yes, you can execute, and sure, you will find some success, but the efficiency and the ROI of that is going to quickly get lost in the mix, and you will just miss it by a little bit. If there's no one else in your space who's smarter than you, great, nothing has been lost. But guess what? That's just not the world we're in anymore, because it is the easiest time in the history of time to start a brand. And people who start brands, who become founders, particularly of consumer packaged goods products, they are obsessed with their own product. Rightfully so, because they are showing up into the world and saying, I personally have a problem. I personally have seen this thing doesn't work, or this isn't enough. And so I'm creating the best version of that. And I'm so deep in my knowledge in this one space that any company over $10 million, they can't keep up with me. It's just not possible. So again, that continuous desire for understanding the consumer has to be the way to get you through those inevitable changes that will come.
So there's a big advantage then in being small at this stage then, from what you're saying, is because you can be fleet of foot, you can really move as the changing kind of sands kind of shift, you can move with those changes. Whereas if you're a big player, often there's big processes, there's systems, there's supply chains that you've got to work with. It's hard, isn't it, if you've got this great big super tanker that you have to turn. Whereas if you're a little player, it's like, no, tomorrow, yeah, we can change. We can just be something different. So do you see that kind of coming through in lots of sectors, that these new startups are really kind of taking market share just because they are more adaptable and flexible?
This actually is another one of the hot topics. When we started at the top of the conversation, you're saying, what are some of these trends? The universe of startups in consumer packaged goods in particular, and it's going to be different depending on the space. Tech is its own monster, right? So in consumer packaged goods in particular, maybe about 5-6 years ago, that's really when we started to see the expansion of founder brands, what are called founder brands. That's one individual who decided, I'm going to create the next best cookie because I'm obsessed with cookies. My grandmother had the best recipe, and now I'm going to make literally the best cookie that there is on the planet. At the time when that was happening, maybe not immediately in the beginning, but quickly as we started to see some velocity in the brands launching, ton of investment from the outside coming in to fuel those brands. And in that, what was the age of the founder brand, I might call it, maybe I will call it that, the age of the founder brands, there was a lot of value and benefit to being the small brand. One, because yes, you were completely and utterly focused on the product, but also there was money left and right. There was also the boom of social media was like really in its heyday, meaning it still is, but that was really when it was starting to pick up really strongly. And so you started to see these founder brands bringing their personal stories into the marketplace. That was also driving a lot of that. And you saw a lot of retailers excited about something new that was booming in social media. There was this sort of perfect storm of, here is this founder with this brand that feels so exciting. And by the way, brand positioning, oftentimes really strong, because I have an uber focus on this audience and on this product I'm selling, right? Which makes it a little bit easier to do positioning. Fast forward through the pandemic, where it became very challenging. Oh, sorry, one other thing actually that enabled that was the rise of co-pack manufacturing. And so where in the past you spent your time making your cookies at home in your own oven, and you can only get to so far with that, co-pack manufacturers, or I should say manufacturers, started to realize, hey, if I do a small run with this little brand, I actually can fill in some of the gap in my business that the big guys leave behind, because they've got their own rules and they're not interested in my problems. No problem. I'm going to take this volume and give it to the small guys, right? All the perfect things happening. Pandemic comes around. Lots of things start to fall apart for the broad founder-owned brand. One being the challenges of supply chain that obviously everyone felt, but as a small buyer, you just don't have the influence and the power to solve. Two, retailers, even manufacturers, even suppliers start to reduce the amount of things they are producing or carrying or buying. And so now the number of founder brands have increased, but the opportunities have decreased. And then in particular, in the last couple of years, the money is drying up, because we're not seeing the kind of return, because it was such a flood of startup brands. You're just not seeing the return as an investor. So now the money is drying up. All that to say that I think we're headed into a place where the founder brand ecosystem is quickly going to shrink. How quickly we shall see, but certainly is going to shrink. And you'll see the winners and losers fall out quickly. The larger CPG companies have started to, by started, I mean the last 3 years, started to realize, hey, I can't do this myself. Let me just snatch up some of these brands. You see lots of failures, not as many wins. However, what the founder brands still retain in power, I think today, and ultimately, as I work with brands that are founder brands, but are larger in scale at this point, past the 5 or 10 million mark, what I work with them on is understanding that actually their positioning and their connection to the consumer is the leg up. That is the thing that makes them have the potential to win out with some of these larger companies. But in order to activate against that, there are a lot of other barriers, because yes, you need to know the consumer, you need to have a very tight positioning, but then you've got to execute against that. And here's where it starts to get a little trickier for brands, and you're starting to see where some can do better than others. But it, again, always comes back to, how do I know this consumer? How well can I connect with them? How well can I articulate what I bring to them that someone else can't? And how well am I able to motivate them by the words I'm giving? Not because I'm tricking them into it, but because I'm connecting with the thing they want, because I understand them that well. How am I able to take that so that I have the right foundation, so that everything else is in a better position to win? And that's ultimately what the founder brand has to bring to the table, particularly today. I hope that's helpful, right? That kind of background about the startups. Yeah,
it is. It's really interesting. And I think it's really quite exciting, actually, because I mean, the way you're describing it then feels like there's more of a connection and a joining up between what we might call traditional business to business marketing and business to consumer here, because it feels like this whole personalization, real true relationship building and connection is now in consumer branding, because it's always been there in business to business branding, because, well, you have to have a relationship before you can even kind of, get the meeting with another business. But yeah, this is really, really interesting time. So do you see that kind of personalization and almost having derivatives of products in various categories to be able to personalize that experience is going to be important for consumer brands? Because it feels like this is getting tighter and tighter. So as the segments or the demographics that you're targeting are getting smaller because they're getting more precise, so your product offering to them needs to get more personal, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's actually a little bit of all of that happening. I should say all of what you're describing and more, in that um, the audiences are both getting smaller. So the market you're addressing is getting tighter. I shouldn't say smaller, but they're just getting tighter around what you're trying to do. But there is also a I don't want to say an expanding of, but maybe it's more of a shifting of what the broader groups look like. So I'll explain it this way, in that you may have cookie company you started, and that cookie company is heavy in protein. Uh, the group of people who would eat a cookie that's heavy in protein is relatively small, and unlikely that Mondelez is one of the larger cookie producers in the world would say, hey, let's create a cookie just for this one thing, one brand, for this one audience. It feels quote unquote small. They've often these big brands have been proven wrong, by the way, in what small really is, but nevertheless they would evaluate it that way and say that's too small. But there's another way to look at it, which is old school marketing, old school CPG marketing talked a lot about demographics in the way that we would define an audience. These are moms with kids 5 to 10 years old. These are men that are 45 to 55 and play leagues on the weekends. These are teens in affluent neighborhoods. And what I have learned by doing and work hard to teach is that there's actually a lot more about us that is similar than is dissimilar when you are cutting us simply by demographics. I think the first time and place that I really started to figure this out is with the term millennial. I think when millennials came to be a popular term, I was really early in my career, and it was a lot of, well, we need to target the millennials. Not different than what you hear today, by the way, of I got to get to the Gen Zs, right? Like, oh my gosh, as a matter of fact, let's start talking about the Gen Alphas. We got to start talking to these 5-year-olds, whatever that might be. And quickly it became that every brand you would hear from, and I'm talking about in a business context, not a consumer context, we're saying, we're targeting millennials. This is our audience. Our audience are millennials. And millennials are the largest age demographic, I believe, outside of the boomers, meaning that it's a gigantic group. As time went on, what became really obvious is that there was something called the millennial effect, which I want to say might have been IRI who coined it, which I think now they have a different name. It's escaping me. They do scan data here in the U.S. to keep track of what's the sales are on the retail side, brick and mortar retail side. But that they or someone else coined a term, the millennial effect, which is, you know what, these kids seem to be onto some things. I like this idea of natural ingredients. I like the idea that these red dyes shouldn't be in my foods. I like the idea that we should hold these companies to a higher standard. And quickly we found that these ideas that they shepherded in, which, by the way, now we see probably the most prominent place you also see that is in the workplace, right? Where they're saying, I don't want to work 80 hours a week. That's not for me. And the rest of us are saying, hey, wait a minute, why are we working 80 hours a week, right? Same idea. They're sort of influencing the culture. And so quickly you realize, hey, we're not just targeting millennials, we're really targeting people with a mindset. People who are perhaps in a certain lifestyle or who are demanding a type of product that isn't actually tied to how old they are or what their race is or where in the country they live or what kind of job they have or what their income is. Because we know that whether you're low income, high income, hey, you're paying $2,000 for the latest iPhone. So that doesn't seem to be a driver the way that it might have been in the past, particularly when you're talking about consumer packaged goods, where the most you're going to spend on any general product in CPG is maybe $15. Right. So it all of a sudden becomes affordable to everyone in the right context at the right time. And if you've got the right mindset, and that's really where I think the shift has been, is let's start to figure out what makes someone most likely to want this type of a solution? And what is it about their life across the spectrum of who they are that makes them an ideal consumer for my product? So in saying that, both, yes, the audiences can be getting smaller depending on the product, but it also can be more about a shift in how you think about the audience, which still can keep them quite large, depending on what that mindset that you're thinking about, which comes back to my points earlier. You can't figure that out unless you're talking to the consumer, unless you're learning about the consumer, unless you're with the consumer, unless you're figuring out, hey, this 22-year-old in Portland seems to be saying the same thing that this 63-year-old in Orlando is saying. Like, that's so interesting that they're talking about the same needs and the same need state, and I can deliver to them in the same way. And that changes a lot about how we think about marketing to consumers.
Gosh, I would imagine that's really changing everything, isn't it? Because it tears up the old textbook of how you do this stuff, and it kind of, it's proper listening, isn't it? I love this. It really sounds like if you're really smart and really listening, I mean properly listening, and just watching for those little subtleties and kind of reinventing it at every step, then you stand a chance, don't you?
Yeah, yes, and what occurred to me as you were saying that there's another layer to this that adds the complexity, which is, while on the strategy side, marketing in CPG has become a lot more about thinking bigger that way, thinking about mindsets and lifestyles and really psychographics. On the opposite side, when we're thinking about execution in advertising, which today basically just means digital and social media for the majority of brands, the way TV was the thing before, that medium actually becomes more and more and more specific as it gets better. So it's almost in contradiction to what makes sense strategically, and it creates a lot of chaos particularly for folks who are not CPGers traditionally, or who are not classically trained, or who have not come up through this kind of thinking. Because often I get clients that show up to me and say, well, I serve 6 different consumers. But really what they're doing is taking an audience and slicing that. So if we take those 2 people, the 22-year-old in Portland, the 63-year-old in Orlando, yes, we're thinking about the same thing. Yes, perhaps we both want that same kind of cookie. Yes, with the same protein. But I might need to talk to them a little bit differently in social media. The 22-year-old in social media is very different than a 63-year-old in social media. And so you show up to me and say, I have a problem with positioning. I have these 2 audiences. I don't know how to talk to them in the same way because they're completely different people. We have to separate the media and the execution of the message from the strategy, because that will exist. You have to create what are then called personas and slice up your audience so that you can say the right thing to the right person at the right time. It just feels in conflict if you don't understand the structure of that and how that strategy needs to trickle down to that last mile, as you might call it. So it gets very hard and very tricky very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, every sort of thing you add in there, there's another, as you see, you call it layer of complexity, and it really is, isn't it? Because if you're going to get this right, you've got to devote some proper attention and resources to it. This isn't something you do on a Monday morning for an hour over a coffee, and then it's like, oh yeah, I've sorted that. This is kind of inbuilt into every single decision, every piece of research, every moment of engagement within the brands. Yeah. Kind of day-to-day activities, isn't it? So
exactly.
How is kind of, I'm really interested in this whole kind of social media thing. How is it for you then? How is social media playing out? Because when I look at social media now from a more generic kind of marketing sense, the word social is gone. I mean, it's an advertising channel for most brands, I would suggest. And I'm going to argue that point. But from a CPG perspective, is it still social? Is there still a part for social within social media?
Yes, I would say a lot of that, and I don't have an expertise in social media, so I'm really going to give comments to you as a strategist for brands and how I think about social media. social media is driven by the consumer in many ways. There's this sort of, from the outside, there seems to be this challenging dynamic between what the consumer wants out of social media and what social media wants out of social media and the players in social media. And you're starting to see the expansion, the trying to think of a very negative word, the sort of inundation of advertising, as you describe it, in a number of channels. And you hear it all the time. I hear it all the time. I can't go on TikTok without seeing an ad. This videos I'm seeing on Instagram, these people are just selling to me. I can't even trust them. And you're seeing that tension from consumers where this is happening. I don't like it. I don't really have an alternative. There's not another way for me to do this and connect with people and know what's happening in the world. And so I'm here reluctantly, but I'm growing more and more frustrated with it. I think in the world of CPG, the challenge with that is that the world has created a line of communication to my audience that in many ways is word of mouth on meth, right? Like it is word of mouth to the 27th degree in a way I could have never created or even predicted as a CPG brand. And so I need to leverage this. There's power in this, but the structure and the rules of this game that we're playing, which actually they're probably not even rules at this point. That's part of the problem, is we're all just doing what we're doing. It's quickly reducing the effectiveness, because at the end of the day, what the consumer cares about is not your bag of potato chips or your beauty cream or whatever it is. What they care about is themselves. I care that that potato chip is going to fill me up and it's going to make my sandwich taste better. I care that that beauty cream is going to make me look prettier in these selfies or whatever it is that I'm doing on social media. And so your focus on yourself, Mr. Brand, it's just not doing it for me. I'm not as interested. And so that efficiency is dropping. And I'm really interested how AI is going to shift some of that. I know I have, as I said, been catching up on some of your episodes, and AI, just like a lot of other podcasts and any other medium for that matter, is the top thing that we're talking about. How does AI change what's happening with the way brands can communicate with consumers? And I'm not talking about the way that AI is going to help us get smarter and better, and it absolutely is doing that. I myself use AI quite a bit. That's all good and great behind the scenes. But in front of the consumer, what does that mean for how they will start to dissect the content they're seeing by real and not real? We're already doing that as consumers. Even you and I do that. But then what happens when I start to notice, hey, something about this feels off, or something about that feels like something else I saw. It feels repetitive, or I don't even know that that's Neil on this reel. That doesn't actually sound like Neil. That might be somebody else taking his voice. Now we're starting to deteriorate the fabric behind a connection, an emotional connection with consumers. That is literally all we're trying to do out there, is connect with them. So I honestly, what I have is a lot of concern for it. I don't know that there are answers. And honestly, social media has nothing but questions and rarely has answers. I tell you that as a mom of teenage girls. So for me, I think it's always about coming back to the same fundamental principles about your brand. How do we stay close to these people that we care about, so that as they shift, as they start to become weary of what they see, I start to move with them. Eventually another app will come, or some other vehicle for how we communicate is inevitable. It will occur. How do I stay close to them so when they get there, I can follow quickly? I think that will be the challenge for brands, is avoiding the shiny object and just staying focused on the consumer. Very hard.
It is, isn't it? And I guess there's one thing which we haven't really touched on yet, but I'd like to go there now because I think it's really, really relevant. And for a lot of sort of marketers and business owners and brands listening to this, it will be like, okay, here's the big question, is how are influencers going to play a part going forward here? Because certainly within consumer products, they have been incredibly powerful as kind of, well, channels, but as certainly as influence over the winners and the losers, particularly in consumer focused brands, and also as micro influencers in a B2B and tech sense, but probably more so in consumer brands over the last, say, 10 years. How do you see that kind of playing out going forward? Are they going to have more influence? Are they going to become less influential? What does Kathy think of that?
Yeah, I think this, like everything else, will evolve. It already has started to evolve. There was the time when influencers were everything, and one person saying something about your product would completely change your brand trajectory. I think we're in a place now where there are still winners, but there are a lot more losers, and we're starting to see the shift. And it's a shift. Again, not a social media expert. I'm talking about the consumer, right? There's a shift in the consumer's willingness to listen to someone I can tell is trying to sell me something. Even if I'm saying, hey, I'm Kathy, look at these, look at this earbuds I use. They're incredible. You should use them too. I may be honest in my use of them. I may be honest in my review, but the mere fact that you are talking about this for the purpose of generating income has a negative impact on many consumers. Not all of them, but many. So we're already starting to see that what feels like is winning for consumers, which by the way has always been true, are voices I can trust. And voices I can trust takes time to build. So as you as an influencer have been able to build an audience and build the trust, great, you may potentially continue on. But I think we're going to quickly discover that there's much fewer, there are fewer influencers than we think there are. And I think that might be a wake-up call for the influencers themselves. I have a lot less influence here than I think I do. And again, I feel we're headed into this world where, because of AI in part, we are challenging everything. In the last 2-3 years, we may have started to challenge. Well, I don't know about influencers, I'm not sure. But now that we're adding all these extra things to the mix, it's going to become that more challenging. And again, this is where for the brands, it's about figuring out, where is my consumer? If you have a consumer that is still heavily into influencers, beauty influencers tend to do a little better than some other influencers because it's such a tactile and important and a sort of personalized product category. That may be a place where the consumer is still leading with the influencer. Great, let's continue that path. But in other places, potato chips, as an example, do you really need an influencer to help you with what is the best potato chip to choose? Probably not. So again, following your consumer and what your consumer is looking for is really the only way to figure out what does or doesn't make sense. Trying to guess because some influencer expert is saying this is what's happening, that's great at a macro level. You've got to come back to the micro and figure out what your own consumer is looking for. Very challenging with influencers today, especially so many brands in the past 3, 4, 5, 6 years have put a lot of money into influencers and just not really seeing that return. And this is a lot of the reason. The consumer is just losing trust in that.
It kind of feels like, I mean, there's a number of things clearly going on here from your commentary. It's just so helpful for me, Kathy. I mean, I know everybody listening to this is going to be thinking, I need to be making notes here, but I am too, because it's lovely to have this kind of sense that it's almost like at many levels we're going through a correction. It feels like there's obviously a political correction coming up here in the UK, and you're going to get it on your side of the Atlantic
I don't know if it's a correction. I don't know what it is.
Let's hope there's going to be something positive going to come out of it on both sides. Right. But anyway, we'll see. But if there is this kind of influencer AI correction, there's a kind of a market kind of bandwidth, there's a scaling thing going on, there's the founder brands and all of this kind of stuff. It feels like we're hitting this kind of watershed. The one thing we haven't kind of mentioned here, though, in the correction is the impact of climate. Now, I don't know whether there's anything that you're seeing in terms of the influence on consumer buying sort of decisions around the whole kind of carbon sensitivity, carbon footprint, climate crisis and stuff. Is that coming through in consumer decisions in the US?
Americans are interesting in that regard, in that I'll put to the side for a moment the much younger citizens of the United States, right? Anyone really under 30. And so the rest of the population, with lots of exceptions, obviously, but in general, the rest of the population, and it has been true for years on years, that we do feel compelled to participate in a positive change, but not at the expense of whatever I need to get accomplished. And what I need to get accomplished may just be that it tastes better, that it works better, or that it's just cheaper, that it's a brand I love, that it's a brand I've been using forever. And these other factors limit my willingness to participate. What you're going to find, however, is if you ask the population, of course, this is extremely important to us. I worry about it. I want to support brands that are doing something about sustainability or climate change. I want to buy recycled products. I want to buy products that are sourced properly. Yes, they're going to say all of those things. But when you're at the local Walmart and you need that laundry detergent, you're not really thinking in that moment. If you're me, you might be. There's a small group of us over 30 that might be thinking, hey, I'd rather take a concentrate or a powder or a sheet. But that's a premium, a significant premium that my husband points out all the time, by the way. This is a significant premium to these products. And so there's real choices I have to make, because it's not enough of a pull for me to make that shift. Now, having said that, there's obviously, as we talked before, there is a mindset. There's a group of consumers that share that mindset. It tends to be on the much younger side. But in actuality, my personal perspective on that, even as a shopper where I can and try to do the right thing, is it's actually not my responsibility. It is actually the responsibility of the company to provide products that to make products that fit those sustainability metrics, and to figure out how do I do this in a way that doesn't cost the consumer more, because doing the right thing shouldn't cost me more. This is very similar to a topic that I've been annoyed by many years, which is lower income folks, particularly Black and brown folks. They don't want to eat healthy. They want to eat Cheetos and Coke. Like, this is what they prefer. But that is a false narrative, in that if a bag of Cheetos is 99 cents or a bag of Smart popcorn is $3.99, how can you say that I can make a logical choice there when I've got a family of 4, a family of 5 to feed? It is illogical to say that I am choosing this because that is what I prefer. I'm choosing this because this is what works for my family. I am going to McDonald's for the dollar menu because that's what works for my family. And so it's a similar sort of construct, that we're putting the emphasis on the consumer, and we can put that emphasis on them when they have valid choices to make. We are in a world, and certainly in the United States, where the choices aren't valid. They're not equal by any means. And that changes the way things work, unfortunately. So that to me is, in my opinion, on sort of the state of sustainability. But I think we'll continue to see that change, certainly as consumers are demanding more of brands holistically and saying, you've got to do more. We'll start to see more and more of that happen. And maybe with this, I'm praying here, maybe with this election coming up, we'll see further changes, or we'll regress. We don't know. We have to wait and see where that goes.
Yes, it feels like then at a kind of a very personal level to anybody listening to this, it's something I love the point that you're saying about the sustainability thing there. The accountability is on the brand. It's like, don't wait for anybody else. You've got to start to take steps. You've got to own it, and then you've got to educate and bring this new offer, this newfound, more sustainable offer to your customers, and help them understand, price it right, price it appropriately. Yeah, there's a real accountability there, which I think we can all, as marketers, whatever sectors that we're serving, we can really learn from. So if you were to kind of sum up then the top 3 things, shall we say, that a marketer in any industry, in any sector can do, and we're not just talking consumer brands here, what would be, say, the top 3 things that you would recommend they focus on to get the best kind of clarity around their brand offer?
Yeah, it's a great question. There actually are just 3 pieces to the puzzle. And that's really understanding, who am I talking to, which I've said a lot about. And honestly, it doesn't matter if you're talking to a consumer, if you're talking to B2B, it doesn't matter if it's tech or healthcare. It really doesn't matter where you are. Understanding your audience is number 1, and understanding them beyond one focus group or one 10 question survey. Really getting deep and personal with that audience and understanding them well. That would be the first part of that. The second part is, what are we offering them? Which sounds obvious that we would know what we are selling, but the question you're answering is, what are we selling that they think we're selling? What is it that they are looking for? What is it that they think that they're buying? Do they think they're buying a protein cookie, or do they think they're just buying something that tastes great and also I can use right after my workout? And maybe that protein is not really top of mind. That's a question to ask yourself. Am I talking about this in the way the consumer would talk about it? And then the third is, obviously, then why should they care? And I specifically say, why should they care, and not why am I better? Because sometimes you're not necessarily better. It may just be different because someone wants something different than what they have today. But ultimately, what we're doing as marketers is demanding a change in behavior. And that is a tall order, as anyone listening knows, even yourself. To just change your behavior in any one thing is a lot to ask. And so to think about, how am I talking about my brand, my business, my values, my purpose, my mission, the people I work with, the way I create the products, how I source my products, everything from beginning to end. How do I talk about that in a way that's meaningful to them, that's going to actually motivate them to make a change in behavior? And it's actually quite tricky to do that. I think this, by the way, is one place where AI can be extremely helpful. I'm just about to start a series writing about how do we leverage AI to get better at communicating with consumers. But that is a task that requires a number of experts. You need someone who's an expert on the insights in the audience, someone who's an expert in your brand and your product, someone who's an expert in the category or the marketplace, someone who's an expert in words and in language. And that could be you, all of them, or you need to lean on experts, which is more likely. And that combination of people, of expertise, can really create an environment that makes attracting consumers so easy. That to me is the ultimate measure. If you are able to put a message out once and immediately get someone to buy that, no coupon codes, no follow-up calls, no tracking of their emails, they're immediately buying, you've done your job. Because that means you got the right person telling them the right thing and telling them why they should care in the right way, and everything works. You've nailed it. That's how you know you've nailed it. If you haven't done that, if that's not possible for you, one of those pieces is off track.
Wow, there is the perfect KPI. If ever I've heard a KPI, there it is. And it's got those 3 lovely, clear elements. You're very good at what you do, Kathy. I have to say, I mean, that's, this is such, for anybody listening to this, if this is your first kind of exposure to whole consumer sort of branding and consumer products, the way that Kathy has just kind of told you these stories, honestly, this is a super complex area. And the way that Kathy's really distilled this down into things that I think all of us can understand is, it's genius. It really is. I mean, you're very, very clear the way you do this, Kathy. And I want to kind of help people to connect with you after listening to this. If somebody is a brand marketer, or they're looking to kind of get into this and they just need that further kind of support, how best to connect?
Yes, I have a page on my site where I've got some freebies for folks who listen to me on podcast. So the website is theclaritywizard.com/podcast. But I'm also really busy on LinkedIn. So you can search my name and find me on LinkedIn, Kathy Guzman Galloway. I accept all connections. I think it's the world's plaza, the world's community square, and I want to meet as many people as possible. So you can connect with me there, follow some of the content that I have, and love to chat with anybody who's really into positioning. I'm kind of a geek about positioning and CPG, if it isn't obvious. So happy to chat more with folks if they reach out. So, but thank you for having me and being so generous with your comments. I appreciate that.
Oh, it's been a really helpful conversation, Kathy, and it's given me a real focus, for my stuff. I'm not currently working too much in the consumer space, so it's a really, really nice kind of refresher, but kind of, yes, it's a correction. It really is, and I think all of us can take, wherever we are practicing our marketing, can take, so much great advice. So thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Neil. Appreciate it.